Hello friends, my name is Rueffert. Welcome to the Gesundheit Kitchen. This is a series that we do for the Gastric Cancer Foundation semi-regularly, and always loving to try to sneak in new little nutrition facts, new flavors, things to keep you eating healthy and being somewhat excited about it, because it can be a chore when having to maintain your weight, having to gain weight, having to always constantly think about what am I eating next can be a little boring. And so I like to try to keep that somewhat on the interesting side. And one of my go-to foods would be mushrooms. And mushrooms, it's a huge family of edibles. And of course, there's also some inedibles. So if you're into the whole mushroom foraging thing, which I am, it's always one of the things, know what you are doing. But we're not going to get into the wild mushrooms today. But we are going to talk about some variety of mushrooms. And so let's kind of go through some of the ones we have. And these are, I would say, your sort of grocery store varieties. If you are adventurous and you want to go into some of the kind of more ethnic supermarkets, you'll find a wider selection of these. But I think one of my favorites would be the shiitake mushroom. Now, these have already been stemmed, so typically there is a somewhat woody stem at the base of the shiitake, which has an amazing flavor, but it is extremely chewy. So typically, I would remove the stems, which I have already done, and save those for a mushroom soup. You can soak them, you can make a stock with them. And if you're really adventurous, you can grind those hydrated stems up to make like a mushroom meal. But that's sort of advanced, mushroom cookery. But if nothing else, even if you only have a few, I typically save all of my mushroom stems in a Ziploc bag in the freezer for an extended period of time. And then when I have enough of them, I would then just simply boil those with the root ends of some onions or celery, or even the peelings of a carrot, to make a mushroom stock. So that's again, that's sort of a secondary thing. But with the shiitakes, you're going for the caps, and I typically just kind of cut them into slivers. It's a very meaty mushroom. It has that umami flavor, which is not quite. It's that sort of extra. It's not sweet, sour, salty. It's that kind of earthy flavor, and so shiitakes in particular are wonderful for that umami flavor. And they have that kind of sponginess, and to that end, when you are cooking with mushrooms, you need liquid, and we'll start sauteing some here in a second, but they are essentially sponges, so they're going to pull in a lot of the moisture initially, and then as they sit, they'll start to release that again. So that's kind of I don't want to say it's a trick, but you do have to make sure you have enough liquid, otherwise they're going to be kind of dry and spongy. So that's a shiitake. This would be what you would consider a button mushroom, which is your sort of run-of-the-mill, average everyday mushroom. Also very nutritious, but more nutritious when it's cooked than when it's raw. You can absolutely eat them raw in a salad, but once you cook them, you sort of unlock the inherent niacin and vitamin D, a lot of B vitamins in there as well. Some vitamins that I couldn't pronounce, actually, when I was looking up my mushroom facts. There were some like, I've never seen this word before, but they are a full, comprehensive, nutrient-dense food. And I kind of like to rough chop them rather than doing just the traditional slivers. I just kind of go through and rough chop them. The stem on the button mushroom is totally edible. It's not as woody as some of the other ones, so don't worry about having to stem or remove the stems of that. But that is probably the most versatile and also easiest to find. And if you are a bargain hunter, which I am for sure, sometimes you'll see these on clearance at your local grocery store because they have a little bit of discoloration on the side, but honestly they get better as they start to dehydrate a little bit. So don't be afraid of them just because they're not styrofoam white. For them to have a little color on them is not a bad thing. All right, moving on our varieties here. This is an oyster mushroom. Now, they're called oyster mushrooms mainly because of the color and this sort of very soft texture. They do not taste like an oyster. So I have had folks say, well, I don't like seafood. I don't think I'm going to like that. It is a name only in visual comparison, not in flavor. So don't worry about it being a seafoody kind of thing. But as with the shiitake, the stems are very fibrous and very woody, but they're incredibly flavorful. So on the oyster mushroom, I really would just go through, and if they're small like this, you can do it with your fingers. If it's a larger variety, like this one here, sometimes you'll have to either take a knife or you can take a pair of scissors and just cut them at the base of that, and then you can just kind of tear these with your hand. But this kind of fibrous, woody stuff, again, amazing flavor, but you would chew on that all day long. So I would save all of that aside for the stock pot for any kind of thing that you're making. Again, on this hand, we would call that a hand of mushrooms, I would just, again, pull off the caps, and then that'll go into the freezer for the stock pot later. And then the last variety that I have here at the moment are the portobellas. Now, this is actually the same variety, just different ages. So this is a baby bella, sometimes called a cremini, and or you'll say baby portobello. And you can see as it gets larger, it opens up, and then you have these darker gills. Now, those are also totally edible, but they will make whatever you're cooking very dark. So it's, again, nothing wrong with them. Some people then, if they don't want to have that dark color in the dish, they would just go through and just scrape those gills out. And again, if you don't want that, you can just save all of those gills for the stock pot for later on. But for my uses here, I'm not worried about that. But again, just as an aesthetic thing, you can remove those if you don't want to have the sort of darker color of that. But for my little mix here, I'm going to use these baby bellas or creminis and just rough chop those. And I like having the different odd size textures so they don't cook uniformly and just kind of get flat and lifeless. I like having the different textures in there. So they are amazing on their own, but together they're an even more complex dish. And to do a proper bit of mushrooms, you have to have some decent aromatics and some type of a fat. So in this case, I'm using good old butter, but depending on what you can tolerate, you could use a plant-based butter, you could use coconut oil or olive oil or avocado oil. Ghee, we've talked about ghee on the show before, which is basically a clarified butter. But since I had this on hand, and I personally don't have an issue digesting butter, I'm going to go in with butter. Turn up my heat here a little bit. So kind of a medium-high heat. And then in with my aromatics. In this case, it's going to be a diced white onion, as well as some garlic. And mushrooms can take quite a bit of flavor. So you can, to your taste. I love a good bit of garlic. Let me come up a little higher here. And I want to get these to sweat, which is really just a culinary term for they literally will sweat out their liquid, but also their flavor. And that is going to flavor all of the butter here. And whatever fat you're using, fat kind of becomes the vehicle to spread the flavors around. So I'm also going to add my salt. And this is my go-to salt blend. I use it all the time. It is a mix of salt, white pepper, a little bit of lavender flower, and coriander. But whatever you have, whatever your sort of salt blend of choice is. But this, again, it's one called Out of the Blue that I make. And I just have used it for years, and that's just kind of my little go-to. But again, you don't have to have that. I do find that lavender is a great flavor with mushrooms, but it's one of those things, a little goes a long way. So you don't want to overdo it on the lavender. A little goes a long way. So once that smells wonderful, and here, let me waft some your way. It smells fantastic. And then we're going to go in with our mushrooms, and really to whatever degree you like them and whatever you want to use them for. If you have an abundance of mushrooms and they're starting to kind of go on you and get start to look like raisins or prunes, you can saute them all and leave them in the fridge cold, and you can add them to a pasta salad. You can add them as a topping to a salad or a pizza. So it's a good thing to have on hand, except for that one that just jumped out of the pan. That one did not want to be a part of my kitchen goings on here. So I'm going to get all that and let that cook down a bit. I'm using an induction cooktop here, which allows you to control the temperature a lot better. But whatever you have, whatever source of heat you have, and if you don't have a means to saute them, you can even do them in the oven. Just drizzle them with a little bit of olive oil or melted butter, a little salt and pepper, throw them in the oven, maybe 375. 7, 8, 10 minutes, kind of depending on your oven. If you have a convection, it'll go a little faster. And you just want them to kind of suck up that flavor. And the salt is a natural extractant. It's going to pull out some of the natural moisture in there. So as those come together, a little heat going there, I am going to add a handful of watercress. Now, this is totally optional. So I'm sort of making a little mini meal here. Without the watercress, you let those cook for a minute, you have some beautiful sauteed mushrooms. They would go any way you want to. But this is the kind of thing that I like to make, where start with whatever ingredient I have in abundance. Today it's the mushrooms, and then I kind of add a few little things to make a quick meal. And watercress is really one of the most nutrient-dense greens on the planet. Has a little peppery bite. If you like arugula, you'd like watercress. It doesn't last very long. It's one of those greens that when you buy it, you kind of want to use it either raw, or if it starts to look a little sad, it's starting to get a little color on it, you can do a quick saute on it. It maintains all of those nutritional values as long as you aren't cooking it too much. And it also takes just a bit of that pepperiness out. So if you have a hard time with the sort of spice of watercress, just giving a little heat to it will kind of calm that down a little bit. So as I'm getting this to wilt a little bit, I'm going to add in a few cherry tomatoes. These are just an heirloom variety. I'm doing this at the end because I don't want to cook them down where they just kind of disappear. I want them to have a little pop to them. And you can see there's that excess moisture in there, but that's also where a lot of the flavor is. To that end, sometimes I'll take a little bit of cooked quinoa or cooked millet. Not only does this add a complete protein, which makes this kind of a one-pot wonder dish, it also sucks up that extra layer of moisture and also flavor. So this becomes, I'm gonna go ahead and turn this off, but this becomes a one-pot wonder, and you have a complete protein that is absolutely nutrient-packed and becomes a delicious one-pot meal on its own, or you could use that, you know, as a side. You could mix it into a little bit of that mushroom stock we talked about and make a hot soup, or you could put this on a pizza. So this is my favorite way to eat mushrooms. And if you're on the fence about mushrooms, if you've always kind of pushed them to the side and all you've really had are those white button mushrooms, kind of experiment a little bit. Try those shiitake or enoki or chanterelle or hedgehog mushrooms or maitake mushrooms. There's a whole world of mushrooms out there. And I always tell people that are picky eaters, the only person you're punishing by being a picky eater is yourself, right? So using the crayon analogy, it's like when you go out to eat and you're given you know, a little coloring page and 3 crayons, which happens to me all the time. People look at me and think, this guy needs some crayons. But anyway, if you spend all your life with just 3 flavors that you eat all day long, you're kind of limiting yourself and your options. But if you can expand your box of crayons to be the full 128 colors, you're going to start appreciating your meals a lot more because you have so many different options, and that humdrum of always trying to think of something to eat now becomes a much easier job because you have so many more things that you can kind of put in your box there. So fun little way to eat mushrooms. It smells fantastic. It'll hold for quite a while, and just a good thing to have on hand when you're looking for something to eat. If you have questions, please never hesitate to send us a message. If you've got ideas on things that you'd like to see us talk about here in the Gesundheit Kitchen, I'd love to have that feedback, and we'll try to get to those in our lineup here. Until then, take care of yourself, enjoy something good to eat, and we will see you next time right here in the Gesundheit Kitchen. Take care.